You guys here? How's the reception? The chat's not loading for whatever reason. I gotta get this chat loading. All right, there we go. How is this? Is this going slow for whatever reason? Any problems? Let me know if you got any problems. All right. It's it's given like a loading signal on the chat, but I can see your comments. It's just kind of annoying. Oh boy. Oh boy, big day indeed. Big day indeed. Um well, yeah, there's been a big shift in the air. And look, guys, you know, I want to just say this before we get into it. Um, I think to a certain extent, because we feel the energy in the air, because a lot of us know where this leads in the end. Um, there's some level of excitement, I suppose you could say. I mean, war is always exciting. Let's be honest here. If you're a guy in particular, there's something in it that stimulates you, so to speak, as a man. It just taps into it. But I want us all the same time to remember that I'm going to do this somber note here. I want us all to remember that people are dying. I mean, there are Russian soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, civilians who are dying right now. And it's a tragedy because it didn't have to happen. And look, while people can probably detect a slight bias towards Russia in the situation, let's make it really clear. I'm neutral about the whole thing fundamentally. I didn't want the war. None of us wanted the war. And it's nothing to do with the Ukrainian population. It's more to do with the Ukrainian government in just this sort of Western bullshit, cabal bullshit, operating out of it. It, you know, it is a dark day in a certain sense that this has brought us to the point where people are dying because of the evil actions of this group. So, all that said, we knew this was coming. We knew it was coming, and we'd seen it for a long period of time. As one of you guys said in the chat, I mean, if it doesn't happen this month, it's not happening at all. I mean, I gave it 6 month window, and we got hit at month 5, right? Late October through March, right? Late October through late March, and but late February was where I was like, I'd be shocked if it doesn't happen by late February. Well, so at any rate, Big Dick Anon's back. Oh my God, is he back again? So we're going to talk about a couple of interesting things here. We're also going to talk about Canada. I'm going to take a lot of questions from you guys tonight. That's the intention. But look, I'm going to first give you a little bit of update on I'm going to update you guys on what I understand from the war. So the first thing to understand is that we don't really know what's going on. Okay, we don't really know what's going on, and both sides are lying. Both sides are putting out a lot of disinformation. You can expect that throughout the conflict because of the propaganda value of it and the fact that it confuses enemy intelligence. For instance, it seemed as if last night there had been amphibious landings in Odessa. That wasn't the case. From what I can tell now, I think that there were some small amphibious landings north of Crimea, but not near Odessa. And if you guys want to get a map and look at a map while we go through this, talking about the southern front at the moment. But talking about that could have confused things for the Ukrainians. Um, so, all right, but here's something I do want to caution about. Both sides are making propaganda, but the Ukrainian stuff is really there's a shit ton of bullshit coming out. Just telling you guys, there's a ton of bullshit coming out right now. The Western media is propping this stuff up like crazy. You know, this thing, the Ghost of Kiev Ukrainian jet took out 3 Russian jets. I haven't heard anything about that, but it seems pretty implausible to me considering that the Ukrainians don't have any air defenses anymore and don't have really much of air superiority whatsoever. I mean, you know, they were claiming huge numbers of there were videos being spread by Ukrainian accounts that were from 2014. Sometimes they were from Syria, and this stuff was debunked pretty much immediately by people who were been following the Syrian war. They were like, "No, I know where this video came from." Another probably, but let's be honest. I mean, the Russians have had, objectively speaking, the Russians have had a very phenomenal advance so far. It's been very clean, okay? It's been very, very clean. Very minimal civilian casualties. They actually have tried hard, from what I understand, not to hit, you know, they're hitting depots, they're hitting command and control centers. They haven't been hitting barracks. They've been trying to minimize casualties. Now, will that continue? Strategically for the Russians, they want to get as many Ukrainians to surrender as possible. So when I say this stuff, don't think I'm saying it from the standpoint of the Russians, you know, they're big softies and they're just amazing. They're the best people ever. No, what I mean is that from a strategic standpoint, if they have a desire to bring Ukraine back into the fold, especially the areas of Ukraine that they're invading at the moment, they don't want to be wiping out the soldiers. They want those soldiers to surrender, which is why the moment the invasion commenced, you had, at least on the front in Donbass, Ukrainian soldiers receiving text messages from the Russian military to surrender. So, I don't know if that's going to continue. You know, in wars, both sides will, or at least one side will tend to be more magnanimous in the beginning. As the war goes on and as more casualties increase, the magnanimity disappears, right? Everybody loves to talk about in World War I the Christmas truce. It's a wonderful story of the British and German soldiers sharing chocolates and singing Christmas carols together. But that was the first Christmas of the war. You weren't going to get that stuff in Christmas 1917. Okay? Now, this war's not going to last that long. This is going to be a 2-week campaign, probably. Tops would be my suspicion. And it's quite plausible it's only going to be a week. Look, at least the primary fighting. And this is what people need to understand. Russia has set themselves up for a pretty strong strategic advance right now. They've encountered minimal resistance in the south. They've reconnected the canal at Kherson, which has, people don't know this, but in 2014, when Russia took Crimea, Ukraine cut off water supply via the canal, the Dnieper canal, so that Crimea was basically starved of water. I mean, it's not that the people there couldn't drink water, but there was no water for agriculture or anything, and it created a bit of a problem. One of the first things that Russian troops did today was open up that canal again, so now Crimea will, so to speak, bloom. But the other thing here So in the south, they've done a really good job. There's been some substantial fighting along the Donbass front, but basically this isn't so much of an issue, even though the Russians haven't made massive progress there, because the main intention of that front, and look, I'm just kind of giving my armchair quarterbacking. I've also, been reading some of the analysis of the situation. It all seems pretty logical to me. In fact, let me do this first. Let me give a little bit of a broad overview. From what I understand the Russians are trying to do, and it makes a lot of sense, is that they're trying to encircle and cut off Kiev from the rest of Ukraine. They also wanted to take control of the facility in Chernobyl because of the nuclear material there, in case there could be some sort of use of it, dirty bomb use of it. And there's a biolab thing as well. We'll talk about that, although that was more airstrikes across the country. And what they basically want to do is they want to cut Ukraine in half at the moment. And we can talk about why they may want to do that, what their objectives are. But they want to have an encirclement of Kiev, cut off Kiev certainly from the western portion of Ukraine. And so the advance into Kharkiv and the continued front in the Donbass, the reason that the Russians are attacking those two areas is because those are the biggest concentrations of Ukrainian troops. Now, the intention here isn't to beat those Ukrainian troops in direct firefight. And this is what a lot of the people, the propaganda accounts don't seem to really want to discuss. But because, they this sort of back and forth in Suma, which is not exactly in the same location as Kharkiv, but it's like a province north and sort of the same general thing. That area of Ukraine is the most fortified because it's the border with Russia. Kharkiv is probably the most fortified encampment in all of Ukraine. But you want to pin Ukrainian forces down in that location so that you can encircle them. So you notice that the troops coming down from the north towards Kiev are encountering minimal resistance, and the troops coming up from the south, from Crimea, are encountering minimal resistance. And so what's going to happen is that those troops are eventually going to meet with each other. Now there's going to be some issues crossing the river. Like I said, this is the first day of the fight. It's the first day of the fight. And okay, the Russian troops in Kharkiv, Suma, Donbass are occupying Ukrainian positions. Well, but that's by design. It's not necessarily about breaking through those lines. It's about forcing the Ukrainians to guard those positions while they get flanked from the other fronts. And by the way, Russia has enormous numbers of reserves that have not been put into the fight yet, and Belarus has not put their own units into the fight yet. And there's indications that there's large amounts of materiel that are moving to Brest, right, which is on the border with Poland. They're not going to attack Poland, and we'll talk about that in a second. But it's also very possible throughout this entire situation that they might start to move south from western Belarus towards Lviv. And the reason for that would then be put more pressure on the Ukrainian government that they have to defend that location. Because if they lose Lviv, they're certainly gone. There's nothing left of Ukraine. If they take Kiev and they take Lviv, it's over. Okay? It's over for Ukraine. So here's the big point here. Ukraine has the worst. Okay, I'm not trashing the Ukrainians here. I'm just because nobody should envy them. They have the worst geographical position that you could pretty much ask for. The country is almost entirely flat, unless you're talking about the Carpathian Mountains. And by the way, the Russians are not advancing into the Carpathian Mountains. Okay, if the Russians take Lviv and Kiev, then what you're going to see is the Hungarians are going to annex those Hungarian sections in the far southwest of Ukraine, and they might move into the Carpathian Mountains and create a line. I can tell you the Russians are not going to fight in those mountains for zero strategic objective. It's not going to happen. The Carpathian Mountains are aligned. So effectively speaking, there is no natural defenses in all of Ukraine except for the Dnieper River. It's a large river. It's the only defensive line that Ukraine has. Meanwhile, Ukraine is surrounded on three sides with an huge, enormous front from Belarus and Russia and the Black Sea, and from Transnistria, by the way, the breakaway region in eastern Moldova, which is 100% Russian and is likely to join whatever Russian creation comes out of this. Okay? So Ukraine has a hopeless strategic position because it's not as if they're just fighting the Russians on the Eastern Front. They're fighting the Russians on the Eastern Front and the Northern Front and the Southern Front and part of the Western Front. They have a really, really tiny border with Poland that is on flat ground. And then they have a mountainous passage to Hungary and Slovakia and Romania. Okay? It's a real shit situation strategically for the Ukrainians. So they're talking about this sort of mass mobilization situation, but the Ukrainians' Air Force is pretty much taken out. We already know that a plane flew to Romania, basically deserting. And, they may try to do some sort of, no step back, every Ukrainian's going to fight to the end. But, look, I'm not convinced this is going to happen. I'm not convinced it's going to go that far. A lot of it depends on the propaganda, what they're able to put forward. The biggest issue right now the Russians have, and by the way, the Ukrainians exaggerated this too. The Russians did this extremely daring airborne assault at one of the Kiev airports. I think it's like Gostomel, I think is the name of it. And that does not appear to have been a success in the sense of the other operations have been. So when I say it hasn't been a success, the Ukrainians are claiming the position was wiped out, but even the Ukrainian Defense Ministry has basically said that's not the case. They blocked reinforcements from coming, but these Russian paratroopers do seem to have a difficult position holding this Ukrainian airfield. It's too hot for them to be able to get support. From how it sounds, they're getting hit really heavily by Ukrainian units, and they're having to call in airstrikes basically all the time. We don't really know for certain. But the Ukrainians are doing all this stuff saying that, like, Ukrainian special forces wiped them all out. That's not true. That's just the Ukrainian propaganda accounts are repeating this over and over again. It's not true. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry has even acknowledged that fighting is continuing to go. No, Jeff, see, this is the thing. It's not even true. It's not true. This is the thing. But they've been successful at spreading this around. But the Ukrainian Defense Ministry has said that there is still fighting going on at the airport. It has not been secured. The Russians have not been liquidated. They have not surrendered. They have not run to the woods. They just have not established control. The control continues to go back and forth between both sides. The Russians have complete air superiority that's in their favor. So we'll see. At the same time, it's a big, but Jeff, it's like, they keep pushing it over and over again, over and over and over and over again. Okay, so what's the point of all this stuff? What's the point of all this stuff in terms of the conflict? Where is it going to go? Okay, where is it going to go? Well, Anatoly Karlin, about a week and a half ago, had a really interesting article, and I retweeted it. But basically, he predicted this exactly and pretty much predicted the entire invasion plan. It's more or less going according to plan. And he said that it was a very high certainty that Russia was going to annex Novorossiya, which, what you should understand about Novorossiya, it's called New Russia. And these are the lands that Russia annexed from the Turks. In fact, you know what? All right, let's do a little quick. I'm going to give you guys a little quick history lesson here so that you guys understand exactly the details, geography of Ukraine, because this is a very interesting and very relevant thing. So, we look at Poland today as this country in Central Europe, but the reality is that while the borders of Poland today are comparable to what it was like at the Piast dynasty very, very early on, very soon thereafter, throughout most of Polish history, Poland was pushed out of Silesia, okay, which is this mountainous area, that hilly area that you're going to see in western Poland, because that area was really rich in iron and important stuff. And the Germans basically moved in there and settled from the area and gradually moved from Prussia, which was the Teutonic Knight state. Okay, that's Kaliningrad, and a bit to the south of that, Prussia was split between Russia and Poland after World War II. The northern part, which used to be Königsberg, named after Antoni Kalinin, who's the only city left in Russia still named after a communist. That Prussia began to gradually merge with Berlin. It became Brandenburg, Prussia. And the borders connected. And you can see, if you look at Germany in World War I, you can see that this was Polish territory. Anyway, I don't want to I can get really lost in this stuff. I want to try to keep it focused. Point is that Poland's borders were mostly to the east. And Poland, when they had a union with Lithuania, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the borders of it were actually quite enormous and extended almost to the Black Sea, briefly, but were solidly to the Dnieper River at Kiev. And Russia had extended to the Dnieper River. And so you had in the 1600s this sort of barrier area. My wife, her ancestor was actually the voivode, which was the noble who was in charge of Kiev at one point in the 1600s. So this was an area that was split between Russia and Poland. Gradually, Poland, and the territory, only the cities had Polish nobles in it, but the population, and they owned the land, but the population was Ukrainian. The Poles and the Russians basically treated the Ukrainians equally as this sort of serf class, so to speak. Gradually, the Poles, because of domestic political issues, got their land pushed further and further back, and the country was carved up between Austria, Germany, and Russia. Now, what's relevant here in terms of Ukraine is that what we look at as Western Ukraine, far Western Ukraine, was mostly controlled by Austria, and Austria was different than Russia and Germany in that it was a multicultural, multi-ethnic empire, and so they encouraged Polish language stuff in Lviv, or actually, as it was called under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Lemberg, right? If you notice with the cities, Lemberg, Lviv, right, and Ivano-Frankish, which was also called Stanislavów by the Poles, right? These Western Polish cities were part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. They have a different architecture. They have an Austrian architecture. Same architecture you'll see in my wife's hometown of Lublin in Poland. And basically the point of all this stuff is that they also allowed and encouraged Ukrainian nationalism because they, for better or for worse, probably for worse in the end for them, you had nationalism broke up the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But in Russia, they suppressed this stuff much more. Okay, so point here is then that all goes away. Poland becomes a country. They have a massive victory against the Soviets, the Battle of Warsaw, and they end up taking basically what would have been these two regions of Eastern Galicia and Volhynia, which are these two sections that were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. All right. What's the point here? The point here is that those areas that the Poles controlled and the Austrians controlled before them are the hotbeds of Ukrainian nationalism. And so the Soviets, for their part, to try to deal with their own problems with Ukrainian nationalism that went all the way to Kiev, but they were less so over there, but they were still substantial. They made all sorts of concessions. They created the Ukrainian SSR. They aligned with the Ukrainian nationalists. But the Ukrainian nationalism is very much tied to the Western areas because of the policies of the Poles and to the Austrians who govern that area. So it's a much more of a hotbed, okay? And it's also more detached from the Russian Slavic, pan-Slavic concept because, Lviv, Lemberg, that was never a Russian city. The Russians never founded the city. It had nothing to do with Russia. So by the time you get to Kiev, and Kiev is kind of Zhytomyr to the west of Kiev, you have the Kievan Rus, this initial sort of Russian Slavic state. West of that is very debatable. It's more debatable. And so the identity is much more mixed up. Okay, so we talk about this stuff, and so now we get to the point of what is Putin going to do, what makes sense for him to do. So if you look at Putin's goals from a couple different standpoints, I believe, even though this is contrary to his rhetoric, there is an agenda for him to try to bring the Slavic peoples, or at least the Eastern Slavic peoples, back together. I do believe that he considers himself, I wouldn't say emperor in the old sense. He doesn't want to recreate the Russian Empire in the same way that the Western propagandists want to put it, but he does believe very firmly that Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Russians are all Russian peoples, fundamentally, with little sub-characters, and that these three nations, along with Kazakhstan, the Kazakhs are kind of an interesting people themselves, and there's a large Russian population in Kazakhstan, that these four countries are probably, he wants to have them under some kind of autonomous union, right? Alternative union to the European Union. Now, southern and eastern Ukraine is this area called Novorossiya. And what's important to understand about it is it was never part of Ukraine until the communists gave it to Ukraine, the Ukrainian SSR, which, by the way, they gave Crimea to much later. Khrushchev gave it as a gift to his bride, his ugly bride, because she was Ukrainian. These areas were never Ukrainian. They were conquered by Suvorov, famous Russian general during the reign of Catherine the Great, in his fights against the Ottoman Empire. And a lot of the cities were founded during that time period, like Odessa, etc. I know, I was thinking about that. I put on the tracksuit. I'm like, people are gonna, I'm either gonna look Russian or British, and probably, more Russian given the context. But the point is, this area, Novorossiya, New Russia, is literally New Russia. It has no Ukrainian identity. It never did. And this is Putin's argument, which is that, and he has a lot of arguments here, but one of his big arguments is that this area is being Ukrainized. So they don't even have any latent Ukrainian nationalism, but they're still having the Ukrainian language forced on them. Russian is being discriminated against. History is being erased. And by the way, I think this is worth pointing out. I mentioned this very briefly in the beginning, but the Hungarian part of southwestern Ukraine, Transcarpathia, if you look at political maps, you can see that they voted against the nationalists as well. And the reason for that is because the Ukrainian nationalists, Hungary has bad relations with Ukraine, because the Ukrainian nationalists won't even let the Hungarian diaspora, it's not actually a diaspora, the Hungarians who live on the Hungarian basin, right, over the Carpathian Mountains, won't let the 150,000 Hungarians who live there conduct business or talk in Hungarian, because they're trying to Ukrainize the entire country. So the point here is that what is Putin going to do? I'm not sure if Putin is going to officially annex the entire country. It seems like it's not his style. Putin's style is to create independent puppet states that are integrally tied and connected to Russia. right? And so it would stand to reason that Putin would create a separate Ukrainian state, or a Novorossiya. Now the question is, what is he going to annex? It's almost certain that he's going to take in the south and the east. And the reasons for this are not simply because of the cultural affinity of the individuals there to Russia, the lack of resistance they're likely to face, the fact that everybody there wants to speak Russian and feels connected to Russia, and the strategic implications also of the fact that this is where most of Ukraine's industry and the prime grain land, frankly, some of the prime grain land in the entire world is from, but also because one of the big security concerns for Russia was that medium-range ballistic missiles could be fired from eastern Ukraine and hit Moscow. Okay? So the border of Ukraine was a bit too far into Russia for Russia's taste, at least given the nature of the Ukrainian government. So from that standpoint, the south and the east seems like it's almost certain, and then you have the fact that Kiev, which people call the west, I'll call it the north center. Kiev is a historic city that the Russians bear significance to, right? They claim it. Let's just put it that way. It has significance, and it's far enough east that it's possible it's a problem. So here's my big consideration here. I think the likelihood of Russia puppeting Ukraine from Kiev or Zhytomyr, which is the next biggest city west of Ukraine, eastward, is almost certain. What I don't know is if Putin is going to try to take the entire country. And here are the reasons, the pros and cons about why he would take the entire country. The pros are the fact that, first off, you only got one shot. So there have been people saying, this is a terrible thing. It is a terrible thing. But they've been saying, well, as Putin's made its point, he should stop now. He can't stop now. If he were to pull out of Ukraine right now, they'd view it as a weakness. They'd put Ukraine in NATO immediately. It would be the worst thing he could make. No. He has to, he rolled the die, right? Alia jacta est. He rolled the die, and he is going to take either a sufficient amount of the country or the entire country. Now, the only reason he wouldn't want to go to the western area, and there's 3 reasons for it, is that the Ukrainian population there are rabid nationalists. You're probably looking at 1 out of 10, right, that would want to be a part of Russia. Like, you could say maybe similar around Kiev, but you could kind of deal with it. Like, you have to think about how much separatist impulse can you deal with. A lot of those people are going to flee the area, and if you have only one section, you could pacify it. But if you're talking about a huge, huge swath of land, you're looking at a very, very different situation here. And I don't think that Putin's intention is to have a long-standing occupation. That's going to be very costly politically. Putin wants to have a quick, decisive victory that boosts his popularity at home. He doesn't want to have a long, drawn-out insurgency. And so when you look at this western part of Ukraine, you have to ask yourself, what is the real value of it? It has no resources whatsoever. And I mean that across the board. It has no mineral resources. It has no grain resources of note. The grain lands are in the southern part of Ukraine. It has no industry. It doesn't even really have a huge cultural background. I mean, if you go to around the border with Zhytomyr, you have the 1939 border between Poland and the Soviet Union. So it seems from historical, practical perspectives, I'm not certain about this from the military specifications, but I think it eliminates the risk of it's far enough west that Moscow is not going to experience a risk of basing issues. And finally, yeah, you have this really angry population. The last piece of it is also that if you advance all the way to the Polish border, the chaos that you're going to experience is going to be out of control. Just in terms of the refugees pouring across the border, Poland can probably expect 1 million refugees over the next week. Maybe the next month, but hundreds of thousands over the next week. And if, for whatever reason, a Russian shell happens to cross the border into Poland, that's when things get crazy. Because that will be cause for Article 4 to be invoked, and then we can actually have a really spiraling situation. It's not something that Russia wants. I was asked earlier in this chat, is Russia going to attack Poland and NATO? Absolutely not. There's zero incentive for Russia to attack NATO. They don't want these countries. They don't even want the Baltic countries. And frankly, I can't say this for probably now because they've started to invest a lot into the naval base in Kaliningrad, but they probably would have been willing to negotiate away Kaliningrad. I mean, in the 90s, the Soviet or the Russian government, the new Russian government, tried to get rid of Kaliningrad to Germany, Poland, and Lithuania. They didn't want it. It was inconvenient to deal with. And you look at right now, they have to have all these LNG tankers off the coast in the Baltic because of Kaliningrad getting cut off from Russian gas. It's a really inconvenient spot. I'm actually of the opinion that if we had healthier dynamics, even now they might be willing to get rid of it in exchange for some normalization of borders and spheres of influence. At any rate, the point here is that the risk, Russia does not want a war with NATO. Russia just doesn't want a NATO client state that's filled with rabid, this combination of Ukrainian nationalism and, hysterical anti-Russian sentiment backed up by the globalists. Doesn't want that on his border, deep into his border. And he doesn't want it harassing a bunch of other people, most of the people in the country, who do not want to be a part of it. And let's speak really plainly here. Putin said a long time ago, he pointed out what we all know, all you guys in this chat all know it. Ukraine is one of the biggest sex trafficking hubs in the world. In Putin, it was within the last decade, I can't remember the year, it was maybe as early as 2011, but certainly 2015. He was talking about the fact of Ukraine being this big human trafficking hub. And by the way, Ukraine is also a big neo-Nazi hub because the CIA has been pumping this up, and they have a good basis for it because in World War II, the Ukrainians hated the Poles and the Russians, and so they looked to the Germans. You kind of have this like every other country thing. So the Germans, after World War I, or actually during World War I, created Ukraine as a buffer to the Bolsheviks, and the Bolsheviks later honored that to try to gain control over the former Russian Empire. But the Ukrainians and the Germans have always had this kind of, the Nazis always had this kind of connection because the Ukrainians didn't like the big geopolitical rival of the Germans, the Russians, and the local nuisance, the Poles. And so during World War II, you had, and we talked about this a bit last time, I won't belabor it, but the Ukrainians were the biggest country by far outside of Germany itself that had SS units. And that's been heavily encouraged. And what's really interesting, I won't comment on it more than that, but the Azov battalion is a neo-Nazi SS group that's run by the Ukrainian government. Okay? It is a paramilitary, or I don't know if paramilitary is the right word, but it is a special unit in the Ukrainian military that is filled with the same sort of demons and criminals as were in the SS. And the word on the street is that these people have been using Ukrainian civilians as shields and firing RPGs. They're in the Donbass right now. Now, I don't know if that's true. But what's interesting is that the Russians have deployed directly, apparently, a Chechnyan elite unit against them. The Chechnyans want to kill them. And, look, the Chechnyans are their own sort of bloodthirsty, the Chechnyans are like the bloodhounds of the Russians. And the Russians had to subdue them. And now the leader there, Karamov, I think is his name, he has this direct fealty to Putin, but they are some of the most vicious fighters that the Russians have to offer. Anyway, we'll see what happens. The Chechnyans really want to kill the Azov battalion, though, and this is well, the Chechnyans did hate the Russians, Jeff, but Putin made a deal, so to speak, with the mafia Don in Chechnya. And he subdued the Chechnyans for Russia. They have autonomy. They got pretty much everything that they really wanted. I mean, we think of Russia as Russia, like, oh, it's Russians. Actually, Russia's a very multi-ethnic country. Anywhere from 75 to 80% of the, flip that around, anywhere from 20 to 25% of the Russian population is not Russian. It's a strong minority population that is arguably comparable to the United States if you were to look at white Americans versus other groups. Okay, so we'll see what happens. The TLDR is that I do see Putin taking out the country. Now, there is and installing a puppet regime, and I think it's probably better than even odds that he doesn't try to take all of Ukraine. But the problem with leaving a rump Ukrainian state is that if he stops, then that Ukrainian state can then be a staging ground for NATO against him and can be used to provoke things yet again. So I don't know what his decision is going to be with that. We'll see how it is. But I would tell you guys at least that the likelihood of Putin annexing or probably puppeting Kiev, south and east of that is almost certain. I mean, and they are going to go through the country and they are going to denazify it. They're going to take out everybody who is a Western plant in the country. And here's the last two things I'll say about it before we move on, and you guys can ask some questions. And then I'll say a few other things afterwards, which is that you guys saw the thread about the bioweapon plants. If you didn't see it, the gist is that the U.S. was developing they had a bunch of bioweapon, they didn't call it that, but they were bioweapon plants across Ukraine. And Putin had talked about before that the West was having bioweapons on their border. And I didn't necessarily take this very seriously. I hadn't heard a ton about it before. However, the airstrikes lined up with a lot of these lab facilities. And second of all, the account that posted this stuff was banned within an hour. And look, guys, the amount of shit people have been talking right now about Biden, about COVID, about everything, it's really off the charts. And they only banned this one account. Okay? So you have to ask yourself this question. Why did they ban the one account that was outlining the fact that Ukraine and the United States had bioweapons? I think by the time this whole thing is taken out, by this time this whole thing is done, I think the world population is going to understand a bit more about why Putin went into Ukraine and why he had to clean it up. Yes, he had his own geopolitical interests. Let's not pretend for a second that Pufa isn't a mafiosa. Putin, there are people protesting the war in Moscow, St. Petersburg. They're getting arrested. I mean, let's not pretend it's a free country. Is it freer than Canada? Maybe it is at this point in time. I mean, let's not throw stones in glass houses. I'll at least say that. But is Russia a free country? No, it's not a free country. Okay? It's not a free country. But Putin is a white hat for Russia. For Russia. He's probably a neutrally polarized individual, from the higher level stuff. And he wants what's best for Russia. He's not 5D. He's not the future of the world. He's not super higher consciousness, but he's not evil. And he's level-headed. And he fundamentally wants Russia to be strong. We're not Russian. Most of us in this chat aren't Russian. But, can we blame him for being honest here? Can we blame him? So we'll see what happens by the end of it. But remember the Bidens. Remember their financial barisma, the financial interest that they had in Ukraine, the trafficking, the money laundering. This is going to come out. Guarantee it's going to come out by the end of this war. You're going to see releases of it. Last thing, not about Ukraine directly. Although I guess I should say this. There's been talk about a no-fly zone. There's been talk about, what's going to happen with NATO. Look, I told you guys this before. Biden doesn't have the nukes. They don't have the nukes. I don't believe that Biden even himself, as senile and ridiculous as he sounds, he's not trying to move units. He's not trying to move units into Poland. He's not trying to move units into Ukraine. Germany itself said they don't have any really military capacity to deal with it. NATO's a joke. It's a fucking joke. It's a fucking joke. And Trump was the only one who was dealing with it. And you have all these Atlanticists and neocons like, we need to expand NATO. How about you make the actual NATO members pay their fucking dues before you add anybody else into it? It's like, let's add another country into it that's not going to do a fucking thing. Let's do that. Let's play that way. NATO's a big joke. Didn't have to be a joke. Look, I would have been all about a strong NATO, clearly delineated spheres of influences and borders, Baltics through Poland, and hell, maybe we could have negotiated something with Western Ukraine and Eastern Ukraine. Maybe we could have figured it out. But the reality is that there was never any incentive from these people to figure it out. They never wanted to figure it out. They wanted to antagonize Russia. They wanted to create a war. And their intention of creating a war with Russia, the reason they want to create a war with Russia, is to cover for the fact that the economy is collapsing, and because of all the other shit that's been going on with COVID and what they have planned next with that. But the economy is going down. They wanted a reason to explain it, which fortunately most people don't seem to be buying. But yeah, this is where it was going. And I actually am of the opinion that Russia tried to resist it, but ultimately, guys, last week you had Ukrainian recon units in Russian territory. You had Ukrainian shells in Russian territory after Russia pulled its units back. Now, look, I'm totally aware that Russia may have done the pullback knowing it wouldn't matter, good optics, that they were prepared and almost certain to invade anyway. I'm not stupid. I understand this stuff. I understand the Russian propaganda machine. I'm also just saying it's facts that Ukrainian artillery in recon units were in Russia. So after, they wanted to solve the crisis and Ukraine wouldn't sign the Minsk agreement, Ukraine intensified its attacks on, the separatist republics. Russia really didn't have an option. If you're thinking from Putin's shoes, what option did he have? If he backed down then, it was all done. So, and if he waited longer, it was all done. So he made a bold move, and unfortunately people are going to die from it. But, do you attack? If you slap a dog in the face over and over again, the dog bites you, is it your fault or is it the dog's fault? Could be a vicious dog. But if you slap a vicious dog in the face a couple of times, and on the third time you slap him, he bites you, do you attack the dog? Is it dog's fault or is it your fault? I mean, I can't deal with the infantile analysis that all these people have. Now, this is the last point. All right, I want to take questions. I'm going to get another glass of wine. I'm going to take some questions. But I want to talk about Taiwan real quick here. Does this mean that Taiwan is next? Does it mean Taiwan's next? My inclination is yes, because everything is set up for that geopolitically. It makes perfect sense that while the world's distracted in Ukraine, that China's going to make a move on Taiwan. However, there are some differences in the situation, and I fortunately have a lot of smart followers, and they've sent me some some information about all this stuff, and the reality is that we are in a, how do I put it? China doesn't have amphibious landing craft capable of attacking Taiwan. The seas between Taiwan and China are being mined. They're not fully mined yet. That'll take 2 more years, but they're in the process of being mined. The weather is very relevant here too. This is not like even France to Britain kind of channel. This is a really substantial passageway. So it's a long distance, and the weather conditions have to be right to even be able to make a move. And apparently those windows are, I think, in April and October. So, and then the final thing you have is that while it may be debatable just how much the forces are going to, U.S. is going to defend Taiwan, the reality is that there isn't more explicit defense agreement. Ukraine had no explicit defense agreement whatsoever. And so, the Western people talked about it like it should, but it didn't have one. Taiwan does have one. Now, someone can correct me if there's some details about this that I'm missing. But from what I understand, they have one. And we have 3 carrier groups positioned outside of China precisely for this reason. So, even though I do think the timing is right geopolitically for China to attack Taiwan, is it logistically possible? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. But I would be very, very shocked if there isn't a big conflict elsewhere in the world that comes from this, especially because China publicly is aligning with Russia. And I don't believe that deep down Russia and China like each other, because China's cabal and Russia isn't. But remember, China betrayed the globalists who are trying to collapse the West, who control the West. And they're using, it's this kind of tit for tat thing where they need Russia to accomplish their own goals, but Russia doesn't trust China or like China. So you have this situation where Russia doesn't want a situation. It's kind of like China's giving Russia a gift and saying, we need to use you for a plan, and Russia says no. And then China's kind of keeps like making it happen by making Biden push this issue. And then so Russia goes and takes it. And it's like, okay, we're in the same bed together, China and Russia. And Russia's kind of like, all right, short-term deal, right? But I think this is only a product of the fact of Russia realizing what it has to do to survive in this moment. And when Trump comes back, be a different story. Not because Trump and Russia are butt buddies, but because Trump and Russia both are anti-cabal, degeneracy. I mean, Putin's speech today talks about that. The Western values have become degradation of the spirit. And can any of us disagree with that? So, all right. Hit me with your questions, guys. Hit me with your questions. Drop them in the chat. Drop the questions in the chat. No questions? You guys don't have any questions? Keep getting all these DMs. You guys are DMing me all these questions, yet nobody in the chat's brave enough to ask a question. I can sign off now if you guys don't have any questions. Have I ever been to Canada? Yeah, I've been to Canada quite a bit. I've been to Canada multiple times. Multiple times. In fact, I've almost been to everywhere in Canada. I haven't been to Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Northwest Territories, none of it, or Newfoundland, or Prince Edward Island. But I've been everywhere else. I don't really count Ontario, though, to be honest. It's funny, like Ontario, I haven't really, kind of crossed it on Niagara Falls, but I don't think that counts. So I haven't really been to Ontario, but been to Yukon Territory, been to British Columbia, Alberta, Quebec multiple times, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. Look, this is the situation. The situation is that you listen, you don't listen. If you don't listen, the bad things are going to happen. And this is situation. This situation. Okay. Jeff, does the situation possibly speed up the timeline for NESARA implementation? Well, look, I don't know that it speeds up the timeline, and I want to say this with NESARA. I don't fundamentally believe in it in the way that a lot of the love and light, new age people in this community or Charlie Ward talk about. I don't buy that shit. I think that we have NESARA and GESARA simply because we get the demon off our back and we have a fair economic system. The way a lot of these people talk about NESARA, GESARA isn't a fair economic system. It's just like everybody gets money and people don't have to worry about things anymore. Excuse me, that only happens if your consciousness is at a level that you don't have an issue with receiving money. Like, money isn't a big deal if you deal with your beliefs and patterns around money. And so if the consciousness of the planet gets to a point, then you have a golden age, because then people don't have scarcity around money and there's no one parasiting off of it or taking from it. But this whole like white hats, have all this gold hidden and they're going to give free things to everybody is just bullshit. And I'm not saying that you were suggesting that, but I just want to clarify that for people who hear those terms, because I think for a lot of people, those terms have started to become somewhat synonymous. Now, I don't think it speeds up the timeline. I think it's just a necessary part of the timeline. The financial system has to collapse. The emperor here has to have no clothes, so to speak. What's going on here? Don't for a second believe that this isn't going to affect the American public. Because on one hand, you have all the people who are like, well, wait a minute, what the fuck? Putin didn't do this under Trump. And then you have the other people who are all about American prestige. And then you have the people are going to see the economy going down, and then the biggest one for the regular person is the gas prices going up. It's death by 1,000 cuts for this regime. So, yeah, I'm plan trusting. Do I think there's a shot that Donald comes back? Yeah, I know he comes back. I know it. I know it. I think that the big question is, does it happen later this year or does it happen early 2023? 107 provides a scenario where the military steps in at some point, probably in the summer, early fall, maybe late spring, and secures the election, so to speak. There's a few arrests, and then the new Congress reinstates Trump, and then Trump becomes president on inauguration on what would have been inauguration day 2023, which incidentally would give him the so he'd run again in 2024, and if he got that, it would incidentally give him the maximum amount of time that an American president can serve. Sounds like a plausible scenario to me, to be honest. Other people are saying that he comes back this year. I will say this, and look, I've been wrong before. I don't want to be one of the can kickers, but it seems very unlikely that Trump returns after January 2023 and that somehow works for us, right? Doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me how that could possibly be the case. So guess we'll see. Thoughts on the Grimes photo she posted in 2019 that's making the rounds last couple of days? Is this one of the ones predicting COVID? I mean, if that's the case, it doesn't surprise me too much because she's a demon. I never really got good vibes from her, being frank. So, will Putin get us our predicted money back? Well, part of this stuff is probably going to be contributing factors. Let's put it that way. Because look, if it flips, if the fraud's proven and it flips, here we go. And by the way, I want to say this about this convoy going to DC. Now, I've heard it may just be like a drive-by, and if that's the case, fair enough. But I'm very skeptical about this convoy going to DC. They're going to DC about the mandates. Come on, the mandates are not really much of a thing left in the United States. You could go to New York City if you wanted to be serious about that. This stuff is being clawed back across the country. I don't trust it. Doesn't seem to me right. So keep your eye out as usual with this kind of stuff. I also saw some reports about crisis actors being hired. You just never know. You just never know with this stuff. All right, let's see here. You said Putin doesn't want a war with NATO, but also that NATO is weak. Why is a weak NATO an issue? Well, let's put it this way. If NATO were strong, okay, this is a good question. Let me hit it from a couple different angles. NATO right now is acting like they're this really, really powerful force that everybody needs to just listen to and pay attention to, and that they're just the best at everything. Whereas the reality is that most of NATO is, you have Turkey, which is Turkey even really pro-Western? I mean, we know it's a super leaky faucet for intelligence information at the very minimum, and is often at completely different odds as NATO, as the West. So you got NATO in that. And then you have countries like Germany, which is a super wealthy country, but yet pays like 1%. I mean, they had a drill, I posted this on Twitter, they had a drill 4 years ago, and they had to use broomsticks for machine guns because they didn't have enough fucking weaponry. I mean, how pathetic is this stuff? This is like, it's beyond pathetic. It's beyond ability to even talk about. It's that pathetic. And so you have all these NATO countries which basically don't do anything. It's just like, wah wah, little baby blanket for the fucking Europeans who don't carry their weight whatsoever. Now, you can ask yourself, well, why does it matter? if Putin's still not going to attack NATO? Well, the issue is that when you're incapable of fighting on a lower level, when you're incapable of dealing with things on a lower level, then you're more likely to escalate the situation. So if there's a skirmish and you don't think your air defenses, if you don't think your Air Force is able to deal with it, then you're much more liable to resort towards tactical nukes. It's kind of like if you can't fist fight, like, you get into a little issue with somebody else, so you say, well, let's take it outside, and you guys throw a couple punches, right? Well, we say, let's take it outside, one of you can't fight, so he pulls out a gun and shoots the other person. But then the problem is that then his friends come over and they shoot you. I mean, this is the kind of thing how it can break out. So it's really a matter of, and of course the other corollary to this analogy is that the person who has the gun is the one picking the fight. Who can't actually, he can't actually deal with it on a regular term, so he gets punched in the face, he pulls out a gun. It's a bad situation for everybody in NATO to have a bunch of loudmouth bureaucrats with a weak military behind it, and the only thing that can back up their words is nuclear weapons. That is a really, if you're doing that kind of stuff, it's exactly as Putin says. You are destabilizing the international order. That's all it is. You might as well be North Korea, because that's exactly what North Korea does. North Korea is a country with a bullshit, dog crap military, but because they got some nuclear weapons, they want people to pay attention to them. It's the way it is. It's the same thing with NATO. I mean, NATO obviously can do more, but the point stands. Okay, so if that makes sense. Yeah, Nassar is when all your debt gets inflated away. Yeah, Ukraine situation is because Ukraine has, on Biden and Russia has, so another way Biden is. Well, it's a good question. It's a good question. And it may be because they had the influence and they're hoping that maybe it's not going to fully come out. I'm not sure if they know to the degree of what the Russians have. They certainly needed the distraction. They needed the distraction to happen. And they needed the United States to lose credibility in the process. So, and we know Biden's a puppet. So they sacrifice their own people all the time. Think about it. We've talked about this before. How does Biden get removed from office? I mean, is it because of the handling of this? Is there stuff that comes out in the aftermath of this? I don't know. It's a good question though, and let's continue to think about it as the situation develops. Trump's role from this day forward, mostly stay on the sidelines and let events play out and himself get vindicated. Big Dick and on talking about the U.S. not doing anything no matter what Russia does because they have all the blackmail material on Biden from Ukraine. That's actually maybe a good explanation from the above, which is why Biden really isn't doing too much. But it doesn't also reconcile why he would then provoke it to occur. So, I think we're going to get the reconciliation of this pretty soon, but we're not quite there yet. How come cabal figures don't get absolutely wrecked by karma given the type of actions they take? Okay, so first off, how do you know they don't get wrecked by karma? But second off, let's look at it from this perspective. They tell you what they're doing. I mean, we could predict this. We could see it happening. So they tell you what they're doing. If I say, hey, I'm going to shoot you tomorrow if you show up here, and then I send you an email that says, hey, show up here, and then you show up and I shoot you, do I have karma for that situation? Actually, on a cosmic level, it's not really clear that I do have karma for that, because I told you I was going to kill you and you came anyway. Now you could say, well, you told me to come. I said, yeah, but I also told you I'd shoot you. So, we tell people, hey, the information goes out that these injections are poisonous, and then then we say, hey, you have to get these injections, and then people go and do it anyway. Do the cabal have karma for that kind of stuff? They don't believe that they do have karma, because you make your own choice. If you decide to jump in the slaughterhouse pen, then you got the karma. Yeah, Juan has been. I mean, Juan is a big source of mine. Juan07. I mean, he's one of the 5 sources I get a lot of my stuff from, that I kind of synthesize together and contrast with my own stuff. Yeah, well, you just said it right here, son. I think because they let us know what they're going to do before they're going to do it, that absolves some of the karmic implications. Way too easy for the Fed infiltration, therefore false flags has happened on Gen 6. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the last big one that was going to, get away with. And I like this one here. Ukraine was a sacrificial lamb for the U.S. to control Europe. So, yeah, anyway, guys, I think that's pretty much covers it. I think we got a lot covered this time. Last thing I'll just say real quick about Canada, because people are asking about this. What was the deal with the convoy? Why did the emergency powers get revoked? 3 things. First off, the Senate was going to block it. Second off, the judges were also going to block it. And finally, and I think this is the biggest one, which is that the geopolitical situation was changing rapidly. And I think Trudeau was just pushing too far. He was going too far. Jordan Peterson talked about this recently. You want to go a little bit, then pull back, go a little bit, then pull back. He didn't calibrate. He did a poor job, actually, as far as I'm concerned. I think he did a poor job. He pushed it too far. And when he pushed with the freezing of bank accounts, the amount of money that went out of the country, the bank runs, was so extreme, so absolutely extreme, that I think he got a lot of pushback, even from not necessarily the Cabal Masters. It was going all over the place. I don't think that they were very happy with him. And maybe they were. Maybe he did what he was supposed to do. But at any rate, they pulled back, and made sense that they pulled back, given what was about to transpire in Russia. It was bad optics, but it was very abrupt. I think everybody agrees it was very abrupt. Look, don't be naive. They showed their cards. They probably showed it a bit too much, and that's going to rear its head again. They may have felt like they couldn't go as far with it as they wanted to, and that's another reason they pulled back. But the social credit system is really key for them to be able to do this stuff. So don't think for a second that that's off the table permanently. So Klaus messed up by backing young cats in office. They're empty suits. Well, yeah, and from what I've heard, it's the same thing with Beto and, maybe Crenshaw, right? But Beto, Buttigieg, Castro, Juan Castro. I mean, all these individuals, AOC, most of them turned out to be complete failures because they needed more time to be, MK Ultra groomed into their positions. And the reality is that shit hit the fan with Trump, and they had to throw all their assets in, and a lot of these guys just washed out. I think Trudeau is, to be fair, one of their better ones, but yeah, he just went a little bit too far. I think he got rattled. Look, everyone makes mistakes. Trump made mistakes, right? Trump made mistakes in office. Don't think for a second he didn't make mistakes. But they were tactical mistakes. And I don't think he allowed himself to, you're always going to, maybe you'll attack a position and then you'll get repulsed and you'll get some casualties. But the issue here is not that you got some casualties, you got repulsed. The issue is when you persist too long and then you get encircled, like what's going on to bring it full circle. So anyway, guys, I think that's probably good. It's I don't even know how long this is, but it's got to be well over an hour. maybe hour and a half. We will continue to stay in touch. I think tomorrow is going to be a big day. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but um, I think we got a lot of big days ahead, though. So anyway, I love you all. Appreciate you. Stay safe out there. And look, let's just pray for the Ukrainian civilians, pray for the Ukrainian soldiers, pray for the Russian soldiers, and pray that this does not get out of hand, in that the innocents are spared the wrath. Because while we knew that some of this would happen, the less of it, the better, God. So, amen.